Yeah, I think it's really important that people do spend significant amounts on themselves during retirement because, as you mentioned earlier, they spend so many years saving, accumulating these funds, and then not to use them seems tragic. Uh, and in some ways, I regret ever having come up with a 4% rule because if people are using that as a guideline, they are not getting out of retirement, unless they could. They should be withdrawing quite a bit more than that.
Bill, I'm ever so grateful that you've joined me for this chat. It was lovely to chat with you last time we spoke, and I thought it'd be great to kind of record some questions for some of the people out there to help them along their journey. Now, Bill, can you take me back to 1994 when you first came up with this research for around the 4%? What was it that you were trying to do back then? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was the early 90s, and I had just become a financial advisor. I started my third career, and I'm not a young advisor, but a new advisor anyway. And I got clients who were about my age, baby boomers, and who were just like me, starting to think about retirement, which was maybe 20, 25, 30 years off for them at the time. And they were looking for guidance. They wanted to know, how do I save enough money? How should I allocate my portfolio with various investments? And how much can I safely withdraw from my portfolio to support my lifestyle? And back then, I looked at all kinds of resources to get answers to that question. I went to my CFP textbooks. I looked at magazines and newspapers. I called fellow advisors, and the answers were all over the map. And not based on any kind of scientific study. So at that point I said, I think I need to do the work of my clients, because this is primarily for my clients when I began out to help them. So I fired up my computer, got my old Lotus 123 working, and a book of rates of return going back to 1926 and inflation, and started doing the study.
Everyone kind of coming up to retirement was always wondering and worrying whether or not they'll have enough money kind of moving forwards, right? And it's that thing where you kind of go through your whole life working and you're accumulating, and then you start decumulating, and then you just have no idea how long it will last for. So I mean, since then, kind of everyone's kind of been calling it the rule of 4%. Now I know you actually mentioned to me last time it was never meant to be a rule, right? No, but it was meant to be what, a guideline, a kind of a base. How would you was it just a rule of thumb? How would you kind of describe it?
That original paper I wrote, I was looking for the worst case scenario historically. What was the worst set of circumstances you could retire into? And gave you the lowest withdrawal rate, and that turned out to be the late 60s, which was followed by multiple very severe bear markets and high inflation, which forced the withdrawals up every year and locked it in.
Because actually it's almost that, right? The inflation almost affects it worse than kind of bear markets, right? Because if you're taking out more over time than you kind of are planning to. Is that fair?
Right. You're absolutely correct. And quite frankly, I knew from the beginning that inflation and stock market valuation were important. But I couldn't figure out a way to get inflation involved in some kind of a mathematical expression. And only about 4 or 5 years ago, I realized that inflation is so important, you have to put it before bear markets. And once you do that, everything falls into place.
Yeah, okay. And so, your new book talks around kind of 4.7. I know I've seen you mention you commented on one of my LinkedIn posts, 5.5. Now, what kind of has changed to make those numbers go up, if that makes sense?
Over the years, my research became more sophisticated. In my first paper, I used just 2 investments, U.S. Treasury bonds and large cap U.S. stocks. Over time, I've added, small cap stocks, mid cap stocks, international stocks, cash, and so forth. And each of those asset classes added some value. So steadily and slowly, the withdrawal rate has risen. Although I suspect we're getting pretty close to some kind of a maximum because I can see in the numbers we're experiencing diminishing returns. If I keep adding assets, I don't necessarily get a higher withdrawal rate.
For sure, yeah. I mean, and actually, well, oh, yes. What do you think is one of the most common ways that people are misusing this rule? And you mentioned kind of earlier, actually, that it was meant to be like a worst case scenario rather than kind of like a benchmark, if you like. That fits into where I see a lot of people looking at this. They don't see it as a worst case. They kind of see it as a benchmark. So what do you see as kind of a common misuse of it?
Well, I think there are two main ones. One is some folks have the opinion that 4% means you take out 4% of your portfolio every year, and that's not how the 4% rule of life is designed to give you a steady increase with inflation over time. The other one, the 4% rule, is too many people use it as a first resort. They start with it and end with it. And I urge people look way beyond that because there are much higher rates available even today in today's difficult environment.
Well, we've got a funny time at the moment, right? With the markets are doing extremely well. Now I know kind of on average, they've done maybe 10, 12% a year. And we had kind of the whole Trump tariffs Liberation Day just over a year ago, which obviously had an impact to the markets then. So we were only kind of up maybe 15% from just before then. But with that, do you think it's a case of, yeah, if the markets are doing well, then you can chip off higher, or do you think you have to kind of start lower?
I think what depends is not necessarily how the market is doing, but how it's valued. My research indicates there's a pretty strong correlation between the valuation of the stock market and your withdrawal rate. If you have a very richly valued market, as you do today, you tend to have lower withdrawal rates because going forward, returns are lower. You're going to get less out of the stocks for a number of years. Conversely, if stocks are cheap, let's say they were in April of 2009 at the bottom of that terrible financial crisis, you can take 8% as a number. It seems to be working out for folks who retired at that time. So you have to be aware of those circumstances.
Yeah, okay, so that's really interesting. So on kind of the hypothetical crash that's always coming. So kind of if markets were to crash, actually you might be able to take out a higher than 4% withdrawal to start off with, right? Because it's that, like you say, then they're kind of expected to then go back up again. So you can kind of gauge that based off of the current situation at any given point.
Yeah, I think probably right now my investment stance personally is quite conservative. I use a third-party service to help me decide what percentage of stocks to hold, depending upon perceived risk in the market. But I expect that sometime, when the market declines, and inevitably will, values will appear and withdrawal rates will blossom.
And you, of course, also have kind of the different levels of kind of involvement for each individual as well, right? So kind of there's the general population who aren't going to be trying to do anything clever with their portfolio. They're just going to have it something kind of static and very passive, and it just does its thing, and they withdraw when they need it. Rather than people who are kind of optimizing things or even micro optimizing. So they might be able to get some more juice out of it. You mentioned kind of your portfolio there, and you mentioned last time we chatted that actually right now you are holding minimal bonds at the moment. Yeah. Now, do you think that's is that just because of you and your current situation? Do you think that's because of the markets as they are? Yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, when interest rates rise, bonds lose money, and that was happening for the last 6 months or so. Interest rates, but now I'm looking at the charts, and it looks like that may have been a false breakout. It may have been that interest rates topped out recently and are going to probably start going down again and go down considerably. If that's the case, I'll probably add a significant portion of bonds to my portfolio because, as you know, as interest rates decline, value of bonds goes up.
Yeah. Yeah. How active are you on managing your portfolio at the moment? Do you do it? How often?
I probably make changes once every couple of weeks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I look at investments which I think are interesting and undervalued, and I like to put money in undervalued investments.
Yeah. Do you see it more as a pastime than a requirement though for you?
Probably.
Yeah.
I could be doing less and still be doing fine, but I
Yeah.
do enjoy it. I manage it not only for myself but my family. So I
Yeah.
have a lot of responsibility. I almost feel like I'm back being a financial advisor again.
And we have a term in the UK called a busman's holiday. I don't know if it's made it to that side of the pond, but kind of when a bus driver goes on holiday via coach, and it's kind of you've retired, but you've retired into the job that you were doing before, and you're just doing it for your family now.
Yeah, that's hard to call me retired technically. I'm not doing financial advising, but still spending a lot of time on this research, as my wife can attest to.
Well, I mean, what I found interesting while doing my research is that obviously the markets are so different though to how they were 20 years ago, just from a retail access perspective, right? Like you couldn't access them in the same way that you can now, which does obviously mean that all of the data is different. And
Yeah, it's definitely different today than it was 20, 30 years ago. I remember some years ago, Warren Buffett saying he felt sorry for investors because they didn't enjoy, the circumstances he had when he began his hedge fund in the 50s, where there were a lot of cheap stocks around. And he's able to buy them and make huge amounts of money. Today, there's so much research being produced in various firms and online. Everybody is aware of what stocks are cheap, which are not, and it kind of reduces the value of some of the research that's been done.
Well, it also means that we're kind of seeing the dips getting bought straight up, right? Because there's so many people that are kind of either trying to play the system or people doing the right thing, which is just constantly buying. And there's more money kind of going into the markets because the retail can do it themselves.
Yeah, well, buying the dip is good until it's not. Buying a dip is a good habit to get into if you believe the stocks are reasonably valued and you want to put your money into stuff. But buying a dip when the stocks are expensive as they are today doesn't really appeal to me. I'm looking for pockets of value rather than putting money into an index fund, investing in a broader market.
I'm a big believer in timing the market beats timing the market. But at times, timing the market is more fun than timing the market.
I agree with that.
Cool. Well, so you mentioned to me the other day around the fact that you feel as though some retirees should be spending more money than they are currently. And is that just because of they've built up such a war chest in times have been good. They've been well disciplined. They obviously have got no idea how many years they have left, but at the same time, kind of, yeah, they will eke out, they will spend as little as possible, but they should be spending more and enjoying life.
Yeah, I think it's really important that people do spend significant amounts on themselves during retirement because, as you mentioned earlier, they spend so many years saving, accumulating these funds, and then not to use them seems tragic. And in some ways, I regret ever having come up with a 4% rule because if people are using that as a guideline, they are not getting out of retirement once they could. They should be withdrawing quite a bit more than that.
Well, like you said earlier, it's that if it's meant to be like a worst case, and I'm definitely aware of plenty of people that are not treating it as a worst case, they're almost treating it as a baseline. Then they're thinking, well, we want to make sure that we're safe, so we're going to stick to kind of a 3.5%, which in my eyes just feels like, well, you're working. First of all, you're working extra years that you don't necessarily need to. Don't get me wrong. Lots of people like their job and their work, but I think there's also we are building out our retirements to enjoy our retirement, and so kind of if they can stop a couple of years before, and then enjoy their retirement more. And like you say, spend more in their retirement. Like you work all of your life, and then you've got the last X amount of years to kind of enjoy yourself. So kind of encouraging people to get out there and enjoy it, but safely, I guess, is the issue, isn't it, really? And obviously you mentioned that kind of everyone loads of people have got different numbers. So where do you think people get it wrong? So obviously there are some, like Morningstar has got like 3.7, Susie Orman reckons 3. Now I'm of the why do you think yours are higher than theirs? There's obviously others that are also higher than yours, but
no, not sure exactly. I know we use different methodologies. Some folks use Monte Carlo simulations. They use projections, projecting returns.
Yeah.
I don't do any projecting at all.
Yeah.
I use historical data strictly. So I know that my data reflects what's happened in the past. The key question is, will it also be true for the future? And no one can guarantee what will happen in the future. So
no one can guarantee at all, right? And it's that whole thing. Monte Carlo sims. So I have AI background. I've done Monte Carlo sims for decades now, and kind of the whenever you're doing it for numbers in a financial case, see you've got that percentage chance, right? But because of the volatility, like it's never going to be the worst year ever 30 years in a row. Like that's just impossible. Like well, I'm not saying it's impossible, because I guess I would be proven wrong. But the likelihood of it being the worst year in a row every year for 30 years for the markets is going to be extremely unlikely. And so it's that case of, right, it's never going to happen. So do you need it to be 100% accurate and kind of 100% safe? No, you don't. You kind of need it to be, well, depending on your approach and outlook, I guess. But going back to the spending more and enjoying more, you kind of don't need it to be 100%.
And I understand why people get worried about the stock market when they see it's so expensive. They know it can drop 50% or more, which is really scary when that happens. But you don't have to necessarily use the withdrawal scheme, the cost of living adjustment that I mentioned, strictly. If you're really worried about the stock market, there are other ways to withdraw money. For example, my friend Jonathan Guyton and Bill Klinger, a computer expert, 20 years ago issued a paper in which they used the COLA scheme, but they applied decision rules. And sometimes they would freeze withdrawal at a certain level. Sometimes they would raise them. Sometimes they would lower them, depending upon the performance of the portfolio. And I haven't finished my analysis of it, but it appears that results in higher withdrawal rates and a greater degree of safety. Also, recently, Warren Buffett, who I have just nothing but admiration for, recorded a video on YouTube in which he suggested another strategy that hold 3 years of expenses in cash. Therefore, if the stock market goes down for 2-3 years, you don't take money out of stocks. You don't sell them when they're getting beat up. Take the money out of your money market fund, and then when the market starts to recover, get back, taking money out of stocks. To me, I haven't tested that yet, but it seemed very sensible to me.
There's the similar to the Cape withdrawal. I don't know if you've come across the Cape withdrawal, which is that. So you have your 2 to 3 years of kind of cash and cash like, and depending on how the markets are doing, you either take it from your cash and cash like or from the markets. And so you have this buffer so that if it does go down within the next year, you've got that kind of buffer there. But then I guess that's kind of almost what the bonds are there for as well, right? In the holding, to kind of almost dampen the up and the down a little bit.
Yeah, bonds are probably at the point now with having interest rates risen so much that they do offer now some protection, a buffer against stock market decline. So I would think in the next big stock market decline, bonds would do very well.
Yeah, interesting. If you were starting your research today with everything that you now know, would you still do the same things to come up with the 4% approach?
No, about 5 years ago, I made a breakthrough in which I was able to work inflation and market valuations into my calculations and replicate the withdrawal rates that occurred in the past. And we've had some pretty high withdrawal rates in the past, as high as 16%, believe it or not, during the Great Depression at the end of the Great Bear Market. But there have been many years where we've had 9, 10, 8, and the average long term over the last 100 years is 7%. So we're living in a period of time now where withdrawal rates are much lower than they have been in the past, certainly below average, primarily because how expensive stocks are. And when that adjusts, we should start getting back closer to the average.
Oh, that's really interesting. So kind of average of 7. Stocks are expensive right now, so it is quite low. The 4 is across everything. Have you got, is there anywhere we can go and look up to see kind of what the withdrawal rates would have been at each year?
Yes, on my website, bengenfs.com, I published a number of retirement scenarios, which assume certain allocation of stocks, certain time horizons, type of accounts, whether you leave a legacy or what. And if you look at the tables there, which are organized by inflation regime, you'll see that for each Shiller Cape level, there is a different level. And there are also charts that show you how historically those withdrawal rates have changed over time. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, wow, that's really good. Thank you ever so much. And then, so for people who do want to go deeper, where would you want people who, I know you've got a book that you've had out for a little while now, where would you want them to kind of, once they've read that book, kind of come to an understanding? Where are you hoping they get to?
Well, hopefully I'll give them a good start. But there are a lot of other fine researchers out there like Pfau and Jonathan Guyton, whose papers are good to go back and look at and read because they offer a lot of valuable advice.
Great. Well, Bill, this has been excellent. Thank you ever so much for your time, and thank you for answering my questions.
My pleasure.